Thank you everyone for joining us. Good afternoon for those of you on the West Coast and good evening for those of us over on this side. I think Harold said it's 80 degrees in LA, so thanks for that good information, Harold. Really appreciate it. It's like 18 degrees here in Pennsylvania, and we got a lot of folks in New York. Good afternoon and evening to all. We are so grateful for so many of you coast to coast joining us for our second Neil Asher Music Fund webinar, Fragile Power, the challenges people in the spotlight face when recovering from mental health issues and addiction. The Neil Asher Fund was created by Jill Jordan, Neil's life partner, and is dedicated to helping musicians and individuals in the music industry access recovery treatment. Additionally, with Jill and the Founders Board, we have created an endowment fund to advance the integration of music and creativity into the residential treatment continuum. Our initial goal is the hiring of a certified music therapist on the Pennsylvania campus. Many of you alumni who are here today know of Father Bill's dedication to music over the years, and certainly the amazing work of Reverend Jack Abel has done in bringing music into the treatment process. This endowment will really be a big step in that advancement. So thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jack. I think both of you are with us. And thank you, Neil. I know that you are with us. For more information about the fund, the Neil Asher Fund, and information about Neil, I believe there's a link in the chat that'll take you to Neil's page on Karen.org. This is not a fundraiser. Many of you have already donated. You're free to donate. This is a webinar, but I want you to know we've raised over $400,000 to date for this cause. So thank you so much. I see Neil's picture on the screen there, and we love and miss our friend and colleague Neil Asher. He was so passionate about music and lifelong recovery. This webinar brings his two passions together in service to those affected by substance use disorder and addiction. So we're going to hear from Neil. We have a clip from a 2015 conference, Gratitude and Trust conference in New York City, sponsored by our friend Paul Williams and our friend Tracy Jackson, who I think are also here tonight. This is a conference, and Neil was a speaker there. So,
my name is Neil, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'd like to thank Paul and Tracy. I know this is called Gratitude and Trust. For me, I had to trust before I got hit with the gratitude. And on November 19th, 1987, while I was working with a band that was performing in Allentown, Pennsylvania, I decided to get on my knees and trust in God to help me get sober. And it happened, and the gratitude has been washing over me ever since. It's been unbelievable. As Paul said, I also work for Sony Music, and I consult Karen. I consult an organization called Music Cares, and I'm going to talk about how we help musicians get sober, or people in the music business, but it goes for anybody. So I was on the phone with Todd last night, and I was just saying, Todd, how many musicians have we lost to the disease of addiction? And we were coming up with the usual names, and maybe 5 or 6. I said, I know there's more than that. I just can't think of them. So you couldn't have done this a few years ago. I Googled how many rock musicians died from drug and alcoholism, overdoses, etc. And some of the people some are just in bands you might know. Canned Heat at 27, Jimi Hendrix at 27, Janis Joplin at 27, Jim Morrison at 27, Robin Cole from the Association at 29, Graham Parsons at 26, from the Stooges, Zeke Zettner at 25, Nick Drake 26, Tim Buckley 28. It keeps going on. Tommy Bolin 25. One gentleman made it to the ripe old age of 42, Elvis Presley. Keith Moon from The Who. Imagine this. Someone from The Who, The Stones, and Led Zeppelin all had drug overdoses in their bands. It's absolutely incredible. Lowell George of Little Feat, Bon Scott, AC/DC, John Bonham, Led Zeppelin, Tim Hardin, Mike Bloomfield, Lester Bangs. It's unbelievable. Thin Lizzy, Paul Butterfield. This is just, and it goes back to Nina Simone and Judy Garland and Bessie Smith. It's actually unbelievable. There's a big draw for people in this profession to use drugs and alcohol for maybe starting out for what they think are creative reasons, although it turns out that those musicians who have gotten sober will all tell you that their creativity did not diminish when they put down the drugs and the alcohol, but in fact was enhanced. And those were the unfortunates. We are blessed to know a whole bunch of people who are very famous who are sober. And these people also raise the flag of sobriety and life whenever they have a chance to. And I'm not breaking any anonymity because all these people have broken their own anonymity to the public. I just said the Stones, Zeppelin, The Who had someone died. Well, the Beatles had someone who lived, Ringo Starr, an incredible advocate for sobriety. Elton John, Eric Clapton, Joe Walsh, James Taylor, Bonnie Raitt, Steven Tyler, Trey Elizondo from Phish, Ozzy Osbourne, Anthony Kiedis from the Peppers, David Bowie, Keith Urban, Donovan, Eminem, Peter Townsend. So,
Thank you, Brother Neil. We're going to see a little bit of you a little bit later too. It's just wonderful to see you, and also very sad. So today, with the help of our esteemed panel, we will explore the unique dynamics that celebrities, C-suite executives, and musicians face as addiction progresses in their lives, affecting their families, their careers, and their health. Central to our discussion is Dr. Paul Hookmeyer, marriage and family therapist, author, researcher, and his book, Fragile Power. Paul is a friend of Neil and a member of the Neil Asher Music Fund Founders Board, and he's joined by two other members of the Founders Board and Friends of Neil, Harold Owens, former Senior Director of Music Care's MAP Fund, and a veteran 3-decade clinician and currently a consultant to Hired Power, that's Hired Power. And Michael Mcdonald, founder of Mick Management and Chairman Emeritus of Music Cares. Paul, Michael, Harold, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to introduce Paul, and then I have a question for you. Dr. Paul Hookmeyer is a fellow in the Global Leaders in Healthcare program at Harvard Medical School, clinician and author of Fragile Power, published by Hazelton 2019. In Fragile Power, he sets forth a new paradigm for providing culturally competent and clinically effective care for ultra high net worth individuals and families who struggle with mental health, personality, relational, and addictive disorders. Dr. Paul is listed as one of the world's top problem solvers in Tatler's High Net Worth Address book and founded Drayson Muse International in London to provide direct services and strategic solutions to high profile and high performance individuals, couples, and families around the world. He serves as a senior expert to Ispani Advisors Limited, a United Kingdom-based family governance firm. His work has been utilized by the World Economic Forum and featured in a wide range of academic and popular publications, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, many, many more. He's a believer, as you can tell, in education as a lifelong process. Dr. Paul, holds a bachelor's in economics, a master's in clinical psychology, a doctorate in law, it's a JD, and a PhD in psychology. During the pandemic, he studied how to optimize the use of digital technologies in the delivery of mental health services at the Yale University School of Management. Paul, my friend, congratulations on writing Fragile Power and helping us to better understand how an individual's power, wealth, and influence may negatively impact their openness to recovery. And so much gratitude for your work with Ocean Drive. You were really the clinical architect of that program for the first several years. And you know for sure that program's doing really well, and you were such a big part of it, so thank you. You and I met in 2008, I believe, when you had your clinical offices at Karen New York's office on 58th Street, and I was just beginning my work with the team there. Best job ever, by the way. Best people ever. And at that time, you were working on your research for your PhD, and we had some great conversations about your research that also, of course, led to your book. So my question for you is, as you were doing that research, what surprised you about the dynamics when it came to this high net worth individuals and their need and maybe challenge in getting help? Paul.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. And yes, it seems like the blink of an eye ago when we were all on that townhouse on East 58th Street, trying to provide clinically competent and culturally relevant services to people in need. So the short answer to that question is, what surprised me was that necessity remains the mother of invention. So I had looked at, been working and exposed to this particular population for a number of years, and saw that while the field of behavioral health, mental health had done a very good job in terms of marketing to this population, that little attention was being paid to the clinical needs of this particular population. And the work that I've had the privilege of doing over the last 15 years really has a very strong autobiographical component. You know, as you mentioned in my biography, I started my career in a very traditional way. I was an economics major, went into the practice of law, was a bankruptcy lawyer, because again, I was really fascinated by the power of money, because as we know, money has extraordinary power in our world. It's like electricity. If we use it to good outcomes, it can create an enormous amount of good in our world. But if it's channeled in an unhealthy way, it can lead to destruction and death. And so I was able to leave the practice of law at a very young age by some circumstances. And I went into the realm of philanthropy, and I was raising money for the environmental justice movement, Sierra Club and Greenpeace International in Europe. And I saw in that process that organizations that were doing really extraordinary work on behalf of humanity were looking at people of wealth and power through a very objectifying lens, and that the humanness that existed below those objects was being completely ignored and diminished. I was living in Amsterdam at the time, working for Greenpeace International. September 11th happened. And as a white privileged male who had grown up in America, the security of my world had always been guaranteed until it wasn't on that day. And I was impacted in a very profound way. I moved back to America, just kind of left my job in Amsterdam and moved back to America and started working with one of America's wealthiest marquee name family, doing transactional work for them, selling their house in Aspen, looking at jet options, setting up a private foundation. And as part of that work, I realized was pulled into a situation where the daughter, 22-year-old daughter, was a crack addict. And part of my charge was to find a facility, a program for her, and pull her out of this crack house in Phoenix, Arizona, and get her into yet another facility. Now, mind you, this family had spent at the time about $350,000 US, throwing money at the problem, thinking that money is the key, money is the solution, right? Because we are taught in America that if you have enough money, then all of your problems will go away. Well, we know, all those of us certainly on this panel, and those of us, many of us in the audience, know that money is not the answer to the problem when it comes to behavioral health and relationship disorders. That in fact, in this dynamic, in this family dynamic, the money was actually leading to a lot of the pathology in the family, that the daughter desperately wanted to be seen and heard by her father. The only time he was really able to do that was when she completely melted down and went into crisis mode. And so all the resources would sweep in. So I intuitively knew that there was a systemic issue involved here that needed to be addressed. I decided to go back to school, and I did a master's degree in clinical psychology with a focus on family dynamics, because I knew that systemically that there was something wrong here. And part of that work, I had to do an internship, and I did it at the Hollywood Sunset Free Clinic. And I was working with people who live in the margins of society in positions of extraordinary powerlessness. I was working with HIV-positive transgendered sex workers. Simultaneously, I was working with this other family in Holmby Hills in LA who were on the margins of society, but in extraordinary positions of power. And I observed that the field of behavioral health, the field into which I was entering, had done a great job in terms of working with people who live in positions of powerlessness. And I based a lot of my clinical formulations based on that. Feminist theory, right? So feminist psychology. So it says that women are not genetically predisposed to higher level of anxiety and substance abuse disorders. It's because they live in society through a stigmatized identity, and the patriarchy that exists in society causes them to suffer from a host of behavioral health disorders. Also, there's a lot of great work that's come out of the queer movement, the LGBT movement, in terms of minority stress. Again, not that LGBT people are genetically predisposed to higher levels of behavioral health issues. It's because they live in the world with stigmatized identity. And I thought, well, this is really interesting because we know that the population in terms of celebrities and in terms of people of wealth is a minority population. To be a successful person in any field requires an enormous amount of effort, and that you exist in the world in a minority. And yet the field of behavioral health was actually discounting that experience. So my master's program was very encouraging for me to work with people who had less power than I did, but actually discouraging of people who live in the world who have people who have more power than I do. And I was hearing things when I was talking about my interests, people were saying, why would you waste your time studying those people? I was like, well, for that very reason that you just have, because A, you're objectifying those people, right? And so I decided to go back to school. You'll see there's a pattern here. I'll have like an existential crisis and then I'll go back to school. I think I'm running out of degrees, but I'm not running out of existential crises. I guarantee that. So I went back to school and I did a PhD in psychology, and I wanted to understand what is it like to have that experience? What is it like to live in the skin of a person of power and wealth and celebrity? And I studied that work in three significant levels of our identity. The first is something called intrapersonal. What's my self-concept? What's my self-esteem like? What's my level of motivation? The second is the interpersonal component. How does that identity impact the significant relationships in my life? And then the third, which is really the most interesting, is the social cultural. So what does it mean to be a celebrity in our society, in our culture? And it means very distinctive things. So I took that work, and I was a Karen at the time, and Karen was setting up Ocean Drive, and the board came to me and said, we want to set up an executive level program, but we really wanted to have some clinical chops. We don't want this to be another holding environment for patients. And so I said, well, let's do it. Let's take this work. And then I took that work, and then I continued to study the particular population and identified three distinct cultural markers of this population. Because if we know we're dealing with a minority, we know that like other minority groups, there are cultural markers. There are defining features of that culture. So the three distinct cultural markers of this population, the first is isolation. If I'm a celebrity, if I'm a creative, I tend to live in a very isolated environment. The second is suspiciousness of outsiders. So this is basic to human beings because human beings are tribal in nature. We orient ourselves around common interests and against common foes. And the third, which is the most unique aspect of this population, is the construct of hyperagency. Hyperagency is the capacity to control your world to avoid any discomfort. I don't want to go to an airport. I'll fly private. I don't want to, so my world is completely set up so that I really don't have to engage in the world in a way that challenges me or that makes me uncomfortable. Now think about like what we ask a patient to do in residential treatment, for sure, or in the psychotherapeutic alliance, in the relationship with the clinician. We ask them to go against every single one of those cultural markers. Come out of your isolation, come into a community of people, the chances are you're going to be the outlier. You're going to be the outsider, right? So you're going to be with people who are outside of your tribe and tolerate extraordinary discomfort while you're physically detoxing, to like talk about, like the pain, the grueling pain of going through an opioid addiction, withdrawal is extraordinary, and then tolerate some discomfort while your clinician is going to poke around some of things in your past and some personality constructs and some trauma experience that you would really just rather forget. You would not want to deal with this. So the way that historically residential treatment and the psychotherapeutic relationship has been created is set up to cut up against every single one of those cultural markers. And then we wonder why, and then we ask ourselves, well, how can people with all these resources like not get quality care? It's because they're not getting care that meets them in their cultural markers and that moves them in a reparative direction. And so then Hazelton came to me and said, we really want you to write this book about your work. And my baby Fragile Power was born. And then I set forth a new paradigm for treating these particular patients that meets them in their humanness, that sees them beyond their objects, and that moves them in a reparative direction. And to do that, you have to create a frame. You have to create a frame that simultaneously holds them and challenges them. And that's the art of the work. That's the art of the work, because I was just having a conversation with a very clever chap in Chicago who runs family offices. And I was saying that, my work doesn't scale. And he was very spot on. And he said, nor should it. Because the work is highly individualized and it's highly, and the fancy word for it is idiographic, that it has to be very unique to that particular population. So that's the work, and it's it's been interesting, and it's been a slow grow that people still have conscious and unconscious bias against celebrities and people of wealth. They simultaneously idolize them and demonize them, right? I want to be like them, but I also kind of hate them. And so it's very complex and very nuanced, and clinicians need to be able to have the training and be able to create a frame that holds the patient and then moves them in a reparative direction.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I love so much what you said is so compelling. The idea of why would you want to help those people? And that just says it all, right? And
right.
And that term hyperagency, I hadn't really understood that before, but reading it and then hearing you talk about it, so I can see that for sure. You just want to make sure that it's a protection, right? It's a defense, and yeah, really, really powerful. So thank you for what you're doing. It's incredible. So we're going to bring in Michael Mcdonald, one of our other panelists, and I'm going to introduce Michael, and then I have a question for him that maybe Paul can respond to after Michael, who's really worked with creators, basically his whole career. But it's really so great to have Michael Mcdonald with us today. Michael is a great friend of Neil's, a member of the Neil Asher Music Fund, Founders Board. He received the Tom Moran Music Award at the Care New York Gala in 2019. His career in 2000, after 6 years as the tour manager for Dave Matthews Band, which that must have been quite an experience, Michael founded ATO Records and his own artist management company, McManagement. In 2008, he left ATO Records to focus on management exclusively. Based in Brooklyn with offices in Nashville and Los Angeles. See, I take my eyes away from there. McManagement represents Ray LaMontagne, Walk the Moon, Sharon Van Etten, Brett Denon, Leon Bridges, love Leon, Maggie Rogers, Camp, Hamilton Lefthauser, Backseat Lovers, Natalie Hemby, The Brook and the Bluff, Carly Rae Jepsen, Amy Allen, Patrick Droney, David Gray, and Mandy Moore. Michael serves as Chairman Emeritus of Music Cares, is an advisory board member of Global Citizen, and a voting member of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, also known as the Grammys, and a voting member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's also a co-founder of Big Deal Music Publishing. Michael, thank you so much for joining our panel and for our friendship and for all you've done with Neil and for the fund. Your several decade experience in working with and representing musicians, what aspects of being a creators that you've worked with, what aspect of being a creator influences their vulnerability to mental health issues and addiction?
Well, Todd, thank you very much for having me, and Harold and Paul. It's an honor to sit next to you on a panel. And I mean, obviously Paul has done the research. So much of what he said is spot on. You know, I think what oftentimes makes a great creative is some pain and suffering that happened at some point in their life, and that their art, thank God for, you know, lucky for all of us, their art has become their outlet and their way to channel the pain. And so, you know, it's often, sometimes the bigger the struggle, the better the artist. And I think that's an inherent challenge for artists who, you know, they suffer the same insecurities as all of us. They suffer the same self-doubt, even though they may appear to be otherwise. But the challenge that they face is that they have to appear to be otherwise. They have to appear to be larger than life. You know, as Paul was saying, they're idolized and demonized. And so, you know, they could walk off a sold out Madison Square Garden and just feel like garbage about themselves and still think they're totally untalented. They could write a song that no one likes and think it's the best of their career. Then they read a review that, you know, one bad review out of 100 glowing reviews, and that cripples them. And so it's a challenge because they're human like everyone else and people that don't live in the spotlight. But they, you know, as you've talked about, and as Neil talked about at the beginning, they can lead a life of isolation, where the more popular they become, the more people they have around them, and the more difficult it gets to actually connect, for someone who can help to connect with the actual person. So there are inherent challenges in that alone, you know, and they have this huge career, these crippling insecurities, and the easiest way to do that is just to self-medicate. And it's something that's in most creative worlds, you know, that line between work and play gets very blurred. And so, you know, after the show at a festival, you're hanging out, you're drinking beers with other bands, you know, where does work start and play begin? You know, it's also a lot to come down from after you play to 50,000 people. You know, who do you talk to about that? There's not many people that experience that. So there's not much commonality for you. And so I think that's where what Paul was talking about, that isolation, you know, really, really is a detriment to them and any inclinations toward addiction and mental health problems that they may have. You know, the good news is that today, you know, as we were talking about before, the stigma of mental health and the importance of mental health, I think, has become so front and center that it's not taboo to talk about. And, you know, I think back on the list that Neil was reading, and how many of those people, you know, if we had Naomi Osaka 30 years ago come out and say, I'm not playing the tournament, I'm just not, I'm not feeling right, I need help. You know, if that had come out 30 years ago, think of who might still be alive. You know, if people were comfortable admitting that insecurity, and you know, I think in a way you know, Naomi's going to be more of an inspiration as a mental health advocate than a tennis player, and she should, because she's a human being with mental health problems, and she used her platform to address something that traditionally has been so taboo. And so I'm hopeful about where we are today, and there's much more conversation about the help that people need. There's many more resources available. Technology has helped us. We're all able to sit in 5 different cities and have this conversation the same way that someone on the road whereas they were locked up in a dressing room all day, alone, isolated, surrounded by their people. Now we can have a one-on-one conversation with that person from a dressing room and stay in touch with that person and stay engaged while they're on tour. So I think the future is certainly bright. There's still plenty of work to do, but I'm really encouraged about where we're headed.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, we really have come a long way. That's for sure. And Paul, you were kind of talking about that frame, and how do you see that in relationship to what Michael's talking about, that with that isolation?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to just tag on to what Michael was saying about hope. We live in such a problem-saturated world right now, and feels as though we're just kind of struggling, just kind of stay afloat. But there's a lot of really great stuff going on, and particularly around mental health and addictive disorders. And so there is an embrace. People are really becoming much more aware of mental health issues and talking about it and having a vocabulary to talk about it. And so I'm very optimistic, and these technologies that enable us to connect with one another, to have meaningful conversations, and to create community, to cut against the isolation that Michael spoke about so articulately. And for me, in terms of addressing this, is like, I'm a realist. Let's stop pretending things. And one of the realities of being a creative person is that the creativity is defined by critique. Whether you're baking a cake, whether you're making a movie, whether you're writing a song, inherent in that creation is critique. How good is this cake? Is this cake as good as my other cake? What do you think about this cake? So you can't have creativity without critique. The issue becomes when the critique overshadows the creativity. And so I think just helping patients have that understanding of, or clients or bands who you're managing, of saying, look, this is, let's not pretend there isn't going to be critique. The critique, what do we do with the critique? And then how do we use the critique in a way that's not debilitating and that doesn't define the entirety of our career and the entirety of our existence? And from a psychotherapeutic standpoint, there are wonderful techniques, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Very simple, very focused. Like, okay, you got one bad review out of 100 reviews. Like, let's look at the thought distortion there, right? Like, let's just say, first of all, this is just part of the deal, and that who knows, there are a number of subjective factors that could be involved in that person's decision. And then, like, let's not allow this to pull us down into this spiral of despair. So there are wonderful techniques, and cognitive behavioral therapy is extraordinarily effective over this Zoom platform. So I think that is continuing to focus on the solution that we have here, and let's not pretending that to be a creative person does not. There's really wonderful things, and there's some really challenging things about it, And so let's move away from this notion that everything's a panacea and that everything is, it's all going to be great, because it's not all going to be great. There's going to be some not great aspects here. So, just being able to have a dialogue, and then having a support mechanism that you can manage that, because look, human beings we're relational creatures. We come to being 9 months inside of our mother's womb, and then we come out of the womb and we're completely dependent upon another person to validate us, to see us and hear us, and not discard us off to the side. And it starts with, oh, aren't you cute? Aren't you charming, right? So this is like hardwired into us. So it's very tied into our central nervous system. If you define yourself, though, by your creative endeavor, well, then now you're dealing, the baseline is you just elevated that baseline. So you just need to be aware of it and bring in a lot of these very effective ways to deal with them.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I want to introduce Harold. I know he has a question for you. Harold Owens is also a member of the Neil Asher Music Fund Founders Board and a dear friend of Neil's, and will be our Tom Moran Music Award honoree at the May 11th Care New York Gala. For the past 32 years, Harold has specialized in the field of addiction treatment for the entertainment, legal, and medical communities. In 1999, he was hired by the Music Cares Foundation, the charity arm of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, the Grammys, as the senior director of the Music Cares MAP program, where he was responsible for the implementation of all aspects of its addiction recovery program, including treatment services, outreach, case management, and provider contracts. He's also a frequent moderator and panelist at a number of music and entertainment industry conferences that address the problems of addiction. In 2001 and again in 2006, have received official certifications of commendation from Los Angeles mayors for outstanding service to the city in the field of addiction recovery. Harold, I know how much Neil loved you, and as our Neil was the co-chair, of course, of the New York Galas for so many years, and I know he would be, and he is over the moon that you are going to be our honoree this year.
I'm smiling right now, Todd. I mean, I love that guy.
Yeah. So I know you have a question for Paul. So
yeah. So Paul and Michael, thank you, man. This is fascinating to me. I've always been fascinated by this subject because, you know, having worked in treatment for a long time, I loved your work, Paul. My question is, in your experience, how do some clinicians kind of miss the mark sometimes in treating this population? In what ways have you found over the years have we kind of missed the mark? You know, I've been in staffing when on a Monday when we look at the census and somebody will come in that is, you know, high profile, and I've seen people make big mistakes. They would not make with other people. So can you kind of drill down on that? I know you talked about it before, but can you drill down on how do clinicians sometimes miss the mark?
All right, I'm going to get a little fancy, a little wonky here. So I'm going to talk like in clinic.
You're always fancy.
Yeah, a little wonky. I think I'm more wonky than fancy. But anyway, so there's two psychological concepts that we need to consider. The first is called transference, and the second is countertransference. So transference is the conscious and the unconscious reactions that the patient has to the clinician. We're very schooled in that, right? A lot of clinicians are able to work in that. Countertransference is the conscious and unconscious reactions that the clinician has towards the patient. We don't like to talk about that very much. And so especially and we also like to think that we're kind of above it, right? So clinicians need to be very self-aware of their thoughts and feelings around money and power and celebrity, right? And to be able to be very clear and articulate about the fact that I really want it, but I really hate some of the people that have it for a certain number of reasons, and get very clear about that. And so, and I write about this in my book. I just happen to be fascinated by Christy Turlington for years now. I think that she's a bit of a goddess. I don't know Christy Turlington. I've never treated Christy Turlington. So full disclaimer here. When I lived in New York, I lived downtown, and so did Christy Turlington. And I would see her kind of like going out to the sidewalk, hailing down a taxi. And I would have a visceral reaction. My heart would start palpitating. I couldn't think clearly. And so I was impacted by the enormity of Christy Turlington's celebrity. She didn't intentionally do this to me. She wasn't trying to be, in fact, she was trying to just blend into the rest of the society. And so I need to be very aware of that reaction and own it, or else it is going to come back and bite me. Because what happens is these particular patients, their antennae are constantly going. Can I trust you? Are you smart enough? Can you hold the enormity of my pain? And they feel their way through the world, right? And so if I'm unresolved in my issues around celebrities and with this particular patient, the patient's going to know that, and then they're going to play out in their transference, and then they're going to manipulate me, and they're going to like make sure that they manipulate me away from any of these of the issues that need to come in. So it's having personal awareness, and then having support systems to be able to process this, to be able to say, wow, Christy Turlington is coming into treatment for me, and I'm like so fascinated with her, like I'm going to have a problem with it. You know, guys, help me work with this, or maybe this isn't the case for me, right? Maybe I just don't. Maybe the enormity of that, because look, this work is not for everybody. not everybody who wants to do this work can do the work. Just like everybody who wants to be an internet influencer can be an internet influencer, right? I mean, so just because you want to do the work doesn't mean you can do the work. You need to be able to bring a certain level of maturity and a certain level of humility and a certain level of capacity to have insight into the process. You know, a big red flag for me is when I'm making a referral to a clinician, and I'll say, you know, I'm going to refer you X, Y, or Z, and they're A, B, or C, and they'll say to me, oh, you know what? I'm just, that stuff just doesn't affect me. Like, I don't watch television. I'm like, forget it. Thank you, click. Because guess what? Because we all do. We've been oriented in our world as human beings who live in a hierarchical structure to put people on pedestals and worship them. This is archetypical. This is time eternal. Started with gods, right? It started with Greek gods, Greek mythology. We created these mythological creatures and put them on a pedestal. Some of them we figured out had clay feet, right? Some of them flew a little close to the sun. But at the same time, we are hardwired to put people on a pedestal and worship them and not see the fullness of their being. So that to me is really having this personal awareness and then being able to work in the transference and the countertransference with the patient to be able to negotiate it and to be able to say to the patient, look, you're Christy Turlington. People probably look at you in a way that is very objectifying. You're a huge celebrity, like it's in the room. So let's talk about it because it's central to their ability to get treatment.
Mm-hmm. And I would add to that, who's Christy Turlington? No,
She's
just kidding.
Do you know Christy?
Just kidding. Yeah, no, you know, I, you know, in working with people in the music industry and entertainment, I've always been fascinated that you have to really get an understanding of the culture of what you're dealing with, and mental health and addiction, at least, but certainly for the music folks out there, it's an occupation related hazard, and touring, the stresses of touring is endemic. So, you know, I also think to add to that, you know, that educating this entourage is so important to get everyone on the right page. And I found that has definitely worked for me. And so I know we're here for time, but thank you.
I'm going to like go over this time thing because I think this is critical. Because I think that you have to think like a lawyer and you have to think strategically about it. And when you have to look at the entourage, you have to be honest about what's up, and that there are some points where interests are aligned and there are some points where interests aren't aligned, right?
You bet.
Let's tell where the interests are aligned and let's figure out where the interests aren't aligned, and then we go from there. Because just because you have an entourage doesn't mean that they're 100%, there's unconditional positive regard, complete support, right? These people are typically on the payroll and they have their own self-interest at hand. So
that's the job.
That's
right?
the job. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, now
Oh, that's great.
Me too.
Somebody just sent me a text just to say that Christy Turlington completed the recent New York City Marathon in lightning fast time too. So
in her 50s too, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know who said that too. Thank you. Yeah, I can't believe this. I mean, we're just rolling along. We could do this. This should be a 2 or 3 hour seminar, and we really do want to look at having another one of these in a deeper dive into the clinical aspects of this. I have a couple questions from the audience, so maybe we can at least get to 1 or 2 of them. It's 7:40.
Ask Michael first, because Michael's in the queue next.
Okay. Yeah, okay, Michael. Can you speak on establishing trust with someone who doesn't trust easily, as well as finding leverage where there is no one around to set boundaries?
If my internet is unstable, you can just mute me and Paul or Harold can speak to this.
Establishing trust.
No,
What are the dynamics that you see when you're working? Because you've established trust with the folks that you manage in so many different
Yeah,
ways.
I think what's important is to meet them where they are and to be honest about what's going on, you know, and understand that they, you know, when they write a song, they have put everything they have into that song, right? They have really opened up their insides for the world to judge. And that's not something that we do on a daily basis. And so when they do that and the world reacts positively, fantastic. When it doesn't, that's really, really difficult to handle. And so understanding they're human beings and speaking to them like a human being, to Paul's point, the last thing the smart ones want is that for everyone around them to just say yes and approve of everything that they do. And that's where, you know, you have to figure out where your interests are aligned and where they're not. But, you know, hopefully there's someone in the entourage that's speaking openly and honestly with the person whose interest is that person's mental health and wellness. And it's not about keeping the tour on the road.
Yeah. I mean, that's really true with families too. You know, when you're working with a family, finding that one person that, you know, really sees and wants help. You don't have to work with the person with the disease or the person with the substance use to get started. Because if there's somebody in there that wants to make things different, that's where you start, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, another question. That was really great. Thanks, Michael. I'll put this one out to anybody who wants to take it. How do you not feel judged every time you have to make a public appearance? So I guess that's something related to that critique aspect.
Yeah, I'll take this. I would say, forget it. You're always going to feel judged. It's just because you are being judged. So the question becomes, what do you do with the judgment? How do you manage the judgment? So understand that you're going to be judged, that there's no way getting around it because you're putting yourself into the world. And so when you do that, you're judged, and then figuring out healthy ways to contain that and to not get pulled down in a spiral. That's kind of the more we fight against something, the more it comes against us. So just surrender to it. Surrender to the fact that you'll be judged. So,
Harold, were you going to comment on that?
Yeah.
Were you going to comment on that? I wasn't sure. I saw you leaning in, but
Who, me?
yeah,
Or Michael?
that's okay.
Well,
Harold.
I just didn't know what context that pertained to. And, you know, we've all seen these celebrities come out and they get out of treatment and they are, you know, talking about their sobriety and when is a good time for that. So, you know, I think that's a very good question. And we've seen a lot of people do that and get all the support and then they relapse. So it's a very, very difficult question. For someone to you know, you should be very timely about when you decide to disclose. I think it's better done on a personal level versus media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, self-disclosure and being honest with somebody that you trust, which can be hard to find in the early stages.
Yes.
Michael, you talked about the stigma, and you know, I love what you said about how it's much less these days. So that's probably a curative factor that relates to how people are more and more people are getting into treatment and getting help. What other curative factors do you think are working in the positive direction to help people with addiction and behavioral health?
I mean, it's all about awareness, and it's all about shining the light into the dark corners of things that people don't like to talk about, and meeting your, you know, discomfort with dialogue.
Yeah. I think your internet thing did stop there. Anyway, okay, great. Paul, you want to just say one more word about that as kind of we're going to wrap up in a minute, but you've got the final words here.
Tell me the question again? I'm a little, my mind.
Curative factors. Curative factors. What are the curative factors when it comes to high net worth individuals, celebrities, musicians?
Yeah, I think you have to think holistically, right? Nothing occurs in isolation, and these are complex problems, right? And we live in a complex world, and so you need to have a number of different interventions. You need to have physical interventions. Sometimes you need to have medical interventions. You need to have social interventions, relational interventions, spiritual interventions. There is not, everybody wants a magic bullet, right? Everybody wants just a shot of something to cure the ill. And it's these issues are so complex and so nuanced, and they exist in very hierarchical, complex systems. And so you have to think kind of like a surgeon and a lawyer and a spiritual advisor, and come up with ways to create a number of interventions. Typically people who suffer from addictive disorders have central nervous issue. Their central nervous system is hyperactive, and they perceive the world in very intense ways. So acupuncture is brilliant in terms of being an effective intervention. And talk therapy is really not for everybody, and it definitely has its limitations in terms of what it can do and who can have access to talk therapy. And so you have to think holistically, and you have to think broadly, and you have to think systemically about these particular issues, and don't look for the silver bullet that's going to solve it, because you waste your time and you waste a lot of money, and it doesn't exist.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about as we were planning this webinar, and we were talking about Neil and what a connector he was, and how he just was always there for whoever. I think we have a clip of Neil.
The two things that are most important in my life were my career and my recovery, and I get to live both of those dreams, and my gratitude is just off the charts. I can't even express how grateful I am. I find myself, this little Jewish boy, when I go to my dentist, I walk through St. Patrick's Cathedral, and every time I go past it, I go in and light a candle. And I've noticed over the last few years, when I light the candles, it isn't, could I get a promotion? Could I move from a small Mercedes to a bigger one? I wind up, and it blows me away, I wind up lighting a candle. I actually put in $5, and you're supposed to put in $2. And I say, thank you, God, for everything you've given me, everything that I have in my life, my friends, my family, my partner, Jill, and Todd, and just Paul, wonderful people. And if anyone knows anyone that's having a problem with addiction, and they need to know what to do or be pointed in a direction, please come and see me. I'm available 24/7, and I would be absolutely thrilled to help, because the more people I help, the longer that I stay sober. There's about 10 million other things I want to talk about, but I don't have the time and I can't do it. And the man's just ready to hit the timpani. So thank you very much for listening to me, and have a great day.
I want what he has. Right?
Do.
That's right.
He always made you feel joyous.
That's right.
In this process.
Yeah. Yeah, he makes me smile, makes me laugh, makes me love, Well, like Neil said, there's about 10,000 more things we could be talking about, and we really do want to extend this conversation. Paul, I can't thank you enough for just your career and your work and your research and all that you've done to bring light to this really, really challenging dynamics and helping people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Michael, wow, your work in the music world and with Music Cares and all the musicians that you work with and help along the way. Wow. So much gratitude. Harold, I can't wait to see you soon. I was going to see you in 2 weeks, but because of just whatever that thing's called, COVID or whatever, we had to cancel our trip to California, but we'll be out really soon. I love you. I love you so much. As Neil said, we are here for you. Caitlin, can you put up that last screen? The Neil Asher Fund is here for you know, we will help anybody. Obviously, you can call any one of us, and we will find the help that you need. If you look at the number of years that all of us have on the screen, you know, there's not too many issues that we haven't seen, and we're here for you. The fund helps musicians who need help, and so any musician who needs residential treatment, please call us and let us know, and really check out the endowment fund, because the power of creativity, that's really what we're talking about today, the power of creativity, and how we bring that into the treatment process. That's what this is all about.